having started at River City Labs, one of the things they used to put on was a program called A Day in the Life of an Entrepreneur. Often they'd also say an entrepreneur's journey. And I remember going along to these before we had any customers, and one of the key things I used to ask when they had the Q&A at the end of the session was, how did you get your first customer? Because we'd been sitting there trying to develop the product, and about 3, 4, 5 months later we still had no customers. And so I'd always ask the question, how did you find your first customer? And they'd come up with an array of answers, but what it seemed to be was it was always came down to a lot of hard work and pounding the pavement. For us, that's no different to how we end up finding our first customer. For us, I had a mate that I'd started law with, and his wife happened to be a physio, and she took lecturing courses out at the University of Queensland, and she would tutor some of the international students that were there. And she'd mentioned to me that she had a number of Canadian and US international students that might be interested. So one day she said to me, well, do you want me to just go in there and have a chat to them about what you're doing and see what comes of it? And I said, well, sure, if they'll allow you to do that. And sure enough, she did. And interestingly, about 3 or 4 days after she'd had those conversations, I received this email in my inbox from a girl. I still remember it now. Her name was Emily. Emily was a first-year med student out at UQ. She came from Toronto. And she sent me an email just asking a little bit more about what we did. She understood the benefits, but she was very keen to understand how she could trust us, etc. And so it was a pretty exciting time for us. I remember having a few emails backwards and forwards with her. And eventually, after I think a day or two of emailing, I ended up going out to UQ to speak to her in person. Came back, had a few more emails, and over that week, I think I'd gone out there about 2 or 3 times to chat to her. In the end, she ended up putting me onto her father, and I was having email conversations with her father in Toronto. This went on for about a week and a half until finally one day we got into work overnight and we'd received our first transaction in from this student, Emily. It was an exciting day for us. I think we got an amount of something like $35,000, which was coming from Canada. So it was super exciting. And that's how we ended up getting our first customer. And now here we are 7 years later with 100,000 customers. Now that we've reached 100,000 students, it's a time for celebration. There's been a lot of hard work that's gone in by all of the team, both in here and across the world. We have teams in 7 or 8 other countries. It's also been a struggle along the way. You get a lot of no's. There's probably, for every yes, there's probably about 10 no's. So to be sitting here 7 years later having 100,000 students really does go to show that perseverance and resilience really do pay off when it comes to having your own startup.